And we are live. So, welcome to Design Room. I'm trying to get better about how we actually start these and say what we're doing.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
I am Mr. Cook, one of the two music directors at ACHS. And above me, or below. Oh, wow. It looks different on the live stream. Go ahead, Mr. G.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I didn't realize I didn't know that was me. I'm Mr. G. I'm the other music director at ACHS. And above to my right, or I guess my left.
I'm Phil. I'm the percussion caption head and the music designer at Camarillo High School.
And soundscape engineer. So we are going to go and break down a little bit of our 2018 production entitled Sky Blue and kind of go over how that came to be. This is very different than the last one, and it's cool because this is Mr. G's first year with us. Well, most of the design aspects happened before he was hired. And then the summer meetings he wasn't able to attend because he was on drum corps tour winning High Vish with Blue Devils B Corps. We have kind of a different perspective on this. So I guess, Phil, what do you remember from kind of the starts of the design process and how we approached it differently?
Well, okay. So what I remember, and as I was reflecting on this in preparation for this meeting, what I remember is I think at some point, two things that happened at once. Like I was in a heavy Peter Gabriel listening phase, just listening to a lot of Peter Gabriel. And so I stumbled on this piece, Sky Blue, and I was listening to that on rotation for a while. And then I think at some point, I think maybe I was in Dayton and I heard a group playing Eric Whitacre's Flight of Paradise. And then I think those two pieces just kind of were living in my head for a while, like right after the winter drumline season.
Would you say they were living there rent-free?
Yeah, I would probably say that. Yeah.
And also your Peter Gabriel phase hasn't ended.
Well, it's kind of mutated and morphed into. Well, it's kind of sharing space with like the Oliver Arnolds and stuff like that. But yeah.
There's actually a lot of tie-ins between different years with this show in terms of source material. Not just the Oliver Arnolds, but one of the inspirations of the show was 2007 Phantom Regiment in terms of some of the visual ideas. In 2007 Phantom Regiment had a lot of it was a flight show. Also, it's called On Air, and they, after their intro piece, their opener was a piece we used in last year's production, or the previous year's production, 2017, which was the Philip Glass piece.
The 1,000 Airplanes on the Roof.
Yeah, so there's a lot of kind of accidental things here. So I'm going to go ahead and share the Dropbox paper. But first, what I really recall early on is Joe Paul, our previous color guard caption head, coming in very specific with he did not want a conceptual show or a storyline show, but very much wanted a simplified design thought that was overarching for the show. And that worked really well because a lot of the source material that we were really attached to lended itself to not needing a storyline. It didn't need a character development. It was very much the music was going to inform the design process and the visual process, and we're going to try to have a more cohesive, simplified thought process.
And as I remember it too, I think for this season, another point of inspiration was the anticipation of the new uniforms. Is that correct?
Yes. So the new uniforms were designed the previous year. We were ready to go with them, and then we received a significant delay, and they were not received until March. When we received them in March, I didn't even open them. I didn't check to see if they were actually even uniforms inside. I was like, I just don't want to see them. I want it to be a cool reveal, next year. The design process, we talked to Pat Seidling. He delivered us a sample. We had edits to make on the sample because they're printed uniforms. There was a sublimation issue where the different pattern on the jacket had some issues. Where it wasn't very clear. It was like very granulated. It's like sending like a low quality JPEG that's small and trying to like maximize it. It just didn't work.
Right.
In the original sketch, the plumes, like it gradiated. So it was a gradual change in color. And then they were like, yeah, we can't really do that. Like it has to be 3 separate colors. And so like there was some back and forth there. And you know, when we're spending that kind of money and something you stay with for over a decade, we wanted to try to get it right. So there was a variety of things that happened that you know delayed it to a certain extent. Also, everyone's getting uniforms. Like every school district decided to finally get their, you know, some people had been waiting for 2-3 decades. But yeah, so the blue, we wanted to really accentuate that, the design of the uniform with a very full and bouncy plume. We wanted to try to utilize that in a visual way and show our new look. So yes, it definitely played a role. So we had in the design process, you know, this is our storyboard, which ends up being very, you know, pivotal to how we create. You know, you talked a little bit last time about tempos being a consideration and alternating between that. And then we kind of go into more details of each section, what they represent. We had a couple different working
this
titles.
Is like this is like basically a cleaner version of the whiteboard from last week.
Yes. So we had kind of just overall sky, and then we wanted to get into something more specific in birds flying and flights, and then we wanted something that was darker. You could actually see over here, Joe put some comments, like a few thoughts. I like sky blue for the title, and I love the piece Arrival for the Birds. This is earlier on where we didn't have some of the pieces decided yet. He said, but I think the show needs more tension, maybe a storm cloud moment. Thinking about opportunities to broaden the color palette. And then he wanted to incorporate hot air balloons, which is still one of my favorite flags I've ever seen. And the way they were staged for their moment worked really, really, really well. It was a cool look. And then you agreed and wanted some contrast. I tried to say that we could have some darkness in the first part, but we ended up deciding that we wanted a dark section later in the show. So this wind section right here became kind of storm section and kind of a darker moment, again, to provide contrast. When you provide a production, you want to have visual contrasts, tempo contrasts, but also color palette and mood contrasts. So that's how we ended up with that. Eric Whitaker's Fly to Paradise was used by a lot of people. This is one of his compositions that he wrote specifically for virtual choir. It was very electronic heavy, and it was written for a virtual choir. He had written music before. He adapted it for wind ensemble. He's adapted things for mixed ensembles, but the virtual choir aspects always was after. And this one was written for virtual choir. What can you tell us a little bit about kind of the composition here of Fly to Paradise?
What can I tell you about the composition? Well, yeah. So are we all familiar with virtual choir? It's the idea that a bunch of singers from all over the world can kind of record themselves singing on their own, kind of what we're going to be doing now in COVID era, but kind of ahead of its time. But like the idea that a bunch of people from all over the world can collaborate and send recordings in, and then they can put them together and broadcast it over the internet. So I mean, the piece, like you mentioned, is pretty synthesizer heavy compared to a lot of the other virtual choir pieces that he's composed. And it features one female soprano soloist, and then just a supporting choir along with those electronics. And so I think part of what we wanted to do is, I mean, before we knew the show was going to be about the sky and like things that happen in the sky, I mean, I think just the sound of that vocal was kind of compelling and something we maybe wanted to integrate. So, I mean, it was kind of cool that in the final product, like basically the winds replaced the supporting choir, but we still incorporated the soprano soloist.
The other aspect is the previous year we didn't maximize what we were capable of soundscape wise. Like we didn't maximize low end in the synthesizer sound. So, and Flight of Paradise has a pretty major low end hit on the Impact. So that was another aspect that we wanted to try to, we were trying to visually kind of feature our uniforms and the color palette, but we also, we wanted to, you know, we were modern now. We had grown into a modern pit setup. We had grown into, we had 2 subs, which at first I think we only had 1. Like we had modified how we were approaching electronics to match what the activity had been. So to utilize this piece and also say, hey, we're here, we're 21st century compliant and in pageantry, and we wanted to like kind of feature that too in terms of sound. The piece solo wise having the solo soprano sound like you had said, but it has a really broad color palette. Yeah, so it was really, you know, kind of a cool piece to kind of hit, you know, kick off with. I'm trying to remember what was. I mean, Sky Blue, while it ended up being the namesake of the show and one of the first pieces we'd like to use, and the mood it set definitely set up our final imagery. We ended up not using a whole lot of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, we really didn't use any of it. Like I think in a copyright law, like not a lawsuit, but like if it were to go to court, they'd probably recognize that we didn't use any of the piece that was worth even mentioning. Some like maybe some chord progressions inspired it, and I quoted the melody kind of very subtly in the closer. But yeah, we didn't actually end up using the piece at all because I think, yeah, just what you said, it kind of created the sonic universe of the show in my, like the way I saw it, at least. It was kind of like the aesthetic and the mood and the vibe of the whole show was kind of inspired by Sky Blue, the piece. And then as we went along, I started thinking about pieces that would adapt to the field, and that would be, you know, effective for us and would create drama and energy. And then the more I was working on the first segments of the show, the more I started thinking that, you know, maybe we leave Sky Blue and let it, you know, just maybe we don't need to arrange and adapt that piece. Maybe there's other stuff we can use, and then Sky Blue can exist as like a awesome that, you know, it's in its original version and we don't need to mess with it.
Another interesting thing is Arrival of the Birds Cinematic Orchestra 2 years prior to Build a Home Cinematic Orchestra, which is a piece that the kids were really attached to, and something that is, you know, one of my favorite movements that BK ever put on the field. So that was also an inspiration, but again, I don't think really used a lot. Olafur Arnold's filled in a lot of gaps for us.
Yeah, and that was well, actually, I kind of want to back up a second and talk about just like music selection in general, or just like what my guidelines, or what, you know, what is important to me when designing a show. And it's as far as the music goes, to me, it's really important that the music can stand on its own. And if you like listen to the MP3, that you get excited and inspired by it. Not just me, but all the members, or, you know, anyone you give it to. Like the music should be able to stand on its own. I mean, first, I think just like, I mean, obviously I'm the music arranger, so it makes sense that I would think that. But, you know, I think just the fact that too, that we live with the show for 3, 4, 5 months, I don't want it to get stale. So for me, I like part of the design process is, and especially just when I'm writing the pieces themselves, like I'm constantly filtering it through the lens of, is this going to be exciting for us all this season? Or am I going to want to listen to this every day? You know what I mean? So I think that kind of informs a lot of the music choices we end up making too.
Oh, for sure. I think our tastes are always influencing. Like you and I, as directors who spend more time with it than staff, because staff has other schools to worry about. I know in my past, I generally I hate our show in October, but we still have another month with it. I think that's a lot of directors have that experience. We're already talking about next year. We're already like, we're trying to get through the season musically. It's not that we hate the show. We obviously loved it, but it's just like there is a kind of a staleness to it. And like, I don't know if you've had that experience also in the past, G, and if you had that same kind of feeling of just like wanting something different in your ear.
Sort of. So I've been really privileged to work with some really great writers for the majority of my teaching career. Obviously having Phil is Phil is an asset for our program. And I've never gotten tired of anything that he's arranged for us, at least since I've been here. And then my last year at my previous job, Tanner wrote that music. And I really enjoyed that interpretation of the stuff that he wrote. So, I mean, I maybe in my first couple of years teaching, I kind of got like, about it. But it was really just those first 2 years. And ever since I've been really happy with the product that I've received.
I think, but like to speak to what like Phil was pointing out, like how much of it is about we're spending time with this. I think in the past, I know in a design process, sometimes we pick tunes that kind of fit a mold to serve a purpose in a show. We don't always love it the same way. And I think that we've tried really hard, and it seems like it works with the students because they're always really attached to a movement or two of each show. And I think that so we tend to try to arrive on something that we can spend more time with. And I'm, I'm guilty of putting on the 2018 and the 2017 and the 2016 playlist that's in my iTunes while driving sometimes if I just need something new to listen to. And like it, yeah, I'm not sick of it. Definitely. So what did you want to say though about kind of how we switched gears into Doria by Olafur?
Well, that was interesting too, because yeah, well, kind of like I said, like at that point in my life, I had been listening to a ton of Peter Gabriel for the past couple of years. And then somehow I got introduced to Oliver Arnold's, and this is around the time when we were designing the shows when I started listening to him. And like one of the first pieces I heard was Doria. And then first, like what struck me is just what a cool just texture and mood it set, just with the pianos and like the string ensemble, and just the chord progressions felt so like almost not quite like almost carefree, but just uplifting and just optimistic. And I just kind of liked the vibe that set. And then at the same time, like my messed up brain was like, this would be a cool percussion feature. So
well, because the percussion feature is sometimes a space filler, or sometimes it like there's a piece that like that will work with percussion. Percussion can do different things. They can play more virtuosic rhythms. They can play harder stuff, but also it's just it's a different source material, really.
Right. And I would say, like earlier I was talking about like one of my artistic mission statements is that the music has to be always intriguing. And I'd say another one is like, I'm not really interested in doing something that's, I don't want to say safe because that's not quite the right word, but like, I guess a better way to put it is like, I want the stuff I write and the programs I work with to stand out and be memorable from every other band that performs that day. Like at Heart Rampage, if there's like 40 groups or whatever, like I want them to remember Camarillo High School that did a piano piece as a percussion feature.
So something that I found, kind of amazing about the piece is it's both synthesized with computers. If you haven't seen Olafur's Tiny Desk concert, he kind of explains that he worked with a computer programmer. He plays something and it actuates on pianos. He also can on acoustic pianos. He can also go to the acoustic piano and play them while they're doing computerized stuff. It's amazing. So what he's doing is also very unique. The instrumentation of the ensemble is totally different colors. It's a string trio with pianos, right?
Yeah, it's like the backup pianos that he programmed. He basically invented a new instrument, And they basically, if I understand correctly, they almost like improv based on guidelines he set or algorithms he set up. So the input he puts in physically on his end influences what the backup pianos play or his synthesized pianos play. It's pretty awesome. And I mean, even this, you can see if you watch the music video, he set up these pianos mechanically too to actually, you know, be like player pianos, but with his input.
So totally fresh. G, what was the first thing you remember from seeing Olafur's stuff? Because I know for me, I know it was totally new and totally fresh and totally amazing, and it really threw me for a loop because it's just like it's not often that you get to find something new. Like we were just listening to the Jacob Collier album, the new one, and to me, it's very new and fresh, but it borrows from other ideas. So every time like a new song would come on, I'd be like, oh, that reminds me of, you know, there's so many influences. The Olafur stuff like that doesn't have a ton of influences.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. It's interesting because despite the fact that there's so many just like ostinato things or quasi ostinato things going on, it doesn't feel that way. Like it feels really dynamic, even though there's just so much repetition. Yeah, so I mean that's what I really like about it, and I mean it can be like as superficial or as like deep as you want to go, which is kind of interesting too. And I think that's one of my metrics for like really talented people is like Jacob Collier actually is like, or even like Snarky Puppy or whatever is, you know, you could play that for somebody who has no musical training and not even no musical training, but just like very little experience in talking about music. And they'd be like, oh yeah, this is really cool. Or you could show it to somebody who knows what they're talking about. And then they can talk to you for hours about like why it's cool. Yeah. So I appreciate that about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just completely fresh.
Super
I guess
fresh.
before we go too far, should we talk a little bit about maybe some of the visual and of what Movement 1 had before we dig into some of the other thematic material we ended up pulling in visually for the Doria piece? So first, this we had props. The props were two-sided and they weighed approximately 2 tons apiece, according to every student. And they served a couple purposes. They were to hide guard equipment. They were to hide performers. There was a lot of different purposes they served, but it was also truly to support the color palette that we were trying to create. Complete randomness at first. If you go down here was the suggestion, the randomness, and then the final product. So we wanted them to seem scattered, and here's the original thought process on how they were going to lend it from the sky blue to the sunset. So it's a really simple, complete, like super simple thought process, but they also served a purpose in terms of making the ensemble look bigger. At times, anytime you add a prop, there's just more on the fields. The more you could take away green from the field, the bigger you look. That's why people use tarps and different things like that. We'll talk about the paper airplanes a little bit later. And then we wanted to immediately have the running and the wings, and we wanted to have flight and motion. The hard part is making high school students move that way and seamless and be effortless and not look like the image I always get of band students not looking light as a feather and like dancers is the original Fantasia, or maybe it was Fantasia 2000, and the hippos are dressed in like ballerina tutus, but they're not very elegant,
graceful,
or graceful as they move. And so that was a struggle that we had all year that Mr. G and Tanner were trying to attack.
It's not an easy thing to do.
It's
a completely new skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we've started integrating a lot of like the flutter feet into our show design, which also is deceptively difficult to like pull off and make look polished. Like the amount of like body control that you need to lift up off of your feet, but also move your feet fast enough to like make it look as though you're floating. It's not an easy thing.
And the activity like has evolved into incorporating more dance and ballet, but the origins of the activity are parade, military band, and that's how students think too. When we teach basics, we don't start, well, we hadn't been starting with body, we were starting with metronomic, like keep your feet in time. Just to have students in the flutter get their feet out of time was always such a challenge. Like you want them so badly to march in time for so much, and then you ask, no, but this part don't march in time. Like actually, it'll look better if you don't. And it's always a challenge to think outside the box and perform outside the box like that for students.
Well, and part of it too, I think, with the in time aspect is that oftentimes the students connect their or their connection to the tempo is through their feet. So if you take away that connection, then they have to figure out some other way. Like they have to have like an internal sense of pulse, which is something that we strive for. But a lot of the time it's not entirely necessary in marching band because you can have the external connection to the pulse, which is your feet. So even like, Nolan had his moment in the mellophone solo where we initially had said, oh yeah, just like walk out of time, nice and easy as you're playing, which isn't as easy as you would think, especially for somebody who spent their entire career moving their feet in time while they play. So yeah, it's not the easiest thing.
No. And additionally, there was some other not easy aspects to some of these moments, like transitions, what we wanted to achieve visually versus what we wanted to achieve musically. It was really important for us to have some obvious visual moments, and so we set up things so all the instruments were set up to spell out fly, but we did not want it to be very obvious that it was spelling out fly until they hit the audio moment, in which case the block lettering would be a little bit more obvious. But to get the timing of that, the instruments were placed there, and then slowly we got sections to their instruments and then needed to get up and immediately set embouchure and play. It's another difficult concept that was pretty important to achieve our intent. But it's one of those things, like looking back, if we had 8 more counts, would that have been more successful? And generally speaking, the answer is usually yes.
I do think that there's a degree of importance to making the moment not seem delayed, unless it's purposeful, right? But even if you're going to make it like drops in like electronic music or whatever, like sometimes people put like that 8 count or 4 count break in there to make it like delayed, but that's purposeful. And I think if we had thrown another 4 or 8 counts in there, it would have felt not purposefully delayed. It would have just felt kind of uncomfortable. Although we didn't do ourselves any favors in terms of ease of execution by making that first entrance like a pretty significant impact.
So they come in facing backfields, and
even the turn front field is not particularly easy
and it's
to execute
to get theirs fly, and then they turn around, and that is hard. Like it's hard to go from backfield time to front field time, and percussion is not there to do you any favors because they're over here not playing. And then you have your first kind of moment, and so that was something that
Cook, I lost your sound. I don't know if that's just me.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Just that last sentence.
Something that was really important for us to have is delay the actual impact, much like the original Flight of Paradise. It's a pretty big build, and then you get like the 808 bass sub drop, and we wanted to make sure that we try to time that. We wanted we wanted the audience to wait for an impact as opposed to a big marching band moment right from the get-go. So there's a lot. It's a full minute and a half before we had an impact.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in with another one of my mission statements, artistic mission statements. I don't want to sound too pretentious, but yeah, I mean, I think another important thing to me for all the shows that I work on and that we do is that you don't feel like you're on a football field as much as possible. Like we're trying to create a universe that the show lives in, and then keep the audience in your universe for 7-8 minutes, however long your show is. So that's like a lot of the reason we start with like sound design, or we start with some sort of hook that'll kind of bring you into the universe and establish a mood and a vibe. Yeah, just so the audience has a chance to understand where we're coming from, I guess.
And props do so much of that. Props in creating a visual representation of taking you away from a field. The field is there to give us a grid, but we don't want people to realize that it's only for the performer's use, kind of, right? Let's go back to the paper and so going to the Oliver, and how did you decide to incorporate winds and to support the percussion moment that it was meant to have?
Well, I think we discussed because I think it's a couple things. Like when you listen to Doria, it doesn't have that big arrival. It doesn't have that big culmination moment. So a lot of times we'll, as arrangers and composers, decide, okay, well, what else can we do to make this piece fit within a marching band idiom, or have those exciting moments that we talk about having. So I think maybe you even brought the idea in, or maybe I was like, let's bring in the winds and create an impact, and then maybe that's when you said, or let's go directly into Arrival of the Birds from Doria.
Yeah, I wanted to create a visual moment that actually, again, was very much inspired by 2007 on air this show, which I will mute in case don't want anyone coming after us.
Slow marching, so I think we're probably okay.
Probably okay.
I'm gonna keep adding them because I'm super not down. They also just announced that they extended their partnership with DCI until 2026. So
until 2026, I have to tiptoe. So the opening moment of this, of the flight, and then so the wings, in which we incorporated later in our show, and this is actually probably there are a lot of
wings in 2007 actually.
Yes, there was. So all of this is all flutter. It's all like forms disintegrating. It's all it's supposed to look like birds flying. And if you haven't seen a giant group of birds, what is it? What is a group of birds?
A flock.
It's a flock. Thank you. A flock. I blanked. I asked for help. I didn't call them a school. A flock of birds, and then when one turns, it all turns. And so like it looks like a larger organism. It looks so unique. If you've been in the Northeast or upper Midwest, you could see probably more of that. So we wanted to try to create that moment, which we needed time to do. We wanted to bring back the flutter, which we knew was important to the concept, and the lightness, the on-airness, the flying. And so that's what we wanted. And so a lot of this show visually inspired what we were trying to do in that moment. And also a lot of times a drum break is like the drums were in the back hash, or in our case, more center X front hash. And then you kind of just like slide people out of the way to the sides and you bring them forward and they kind of park. Well, we actually really wanted to allow them to have kind of an indoor percussion moment. It was important for Paul, especially. And then we created drill that got more complex as it happened. And some of this I wrote as a framework, and some of this was rewritten by staff to create a better moment. So this was all the disintegrating it, and then it was moving up and around. And as people turned, the flock started to turn. And it's not right there. We'll stop. We have these bird props that Joe found online. there. So it's a kite, and the kite like flutters, like it worked like that. So we attached that, and that became part of our imagery, and we wanted that bird to come through, and the band members follow the bird, almost like the plumes were the flock, and the bird was leading the flock. The problem was we could not get guard to get there fast enough, so the intent and design behind the moment could never fully be achieved, unfortunately.
I just remember running with the kite, and
it fell apart.
It fell apart.
I remember that. And we were in the box going, and then Joe's like, "Did you break my prop?" Like yelling without the mic. It was a classic Joe moment.
Yeah, it was good. Those are some heavy birds, though. All our props were heavy.
All of it was heavy.
Well built.
Dense, like a cool, like elegant moment from the guard here under some drill that is, again, more indoor drum line, a lot of rotations, a lot of velocity to what they're doing. And this was another moment that the design process was inspired by something else, specifically a RCC indoor show, and they had a lot of poles with paper airplanes on top. So another thing that just flies, simple representation. And we had these concrete buckets so they wouldn't, topple over. And this is actually specifically Hart's show at College of the Canyons tends to have swirling winds. So that, like, sometimes when we design props, we think about where's our show schedule and what is going to impact a prop at said stadium. And Moorpark sometimes has that. So we had this moment, but getting kids from here up and around to create a visual moment to here to do choreo, it was an underutilized prop that was really a cool prop that could have been, we ended up actually incorporating it again later because I was like, we have to use those props again.
I want to talk about really quick how poorly designed props can be a huge influence. So that the summer before this, when I was doing the B2B thing, we had some props for that show. What was it called? The Other Side was the name of that show. We had some props that were just like big backdrops, and the designer of the show wanted them to be like 10 feet tall, and basically as tall as we could get into Lucas Oil, which I think is 10 feet. And I think they were 5 yards wide. Each of them was, so 15 feet wide or something like that. And they were literally just like, originally he wanted screen printed vinyl, like you would put on like a indoor percussion floor. So basically he wanted sails for prop on wheels, mind you, sails. That's like what they were. And the entire design team, or all the Viz staff was like, it's not going to work. Like, I hope, you need to be aware that's not going to work. And lo and behold, it didn't. And
there's the ways actually people are able to make vinyl work are complicated because you have to cut holes into it to let the air through.
Yeah, well,
then it ruins the image.
Yeah,
and then it ruins the image of the prop, and it's not easy to accomplish with vinyl for sure.
Yeah, we had to switch them out to use even with holes cut, they still caught wind and moved, and so we had to switch the fabric, and even then we still had to get behind them sometimes, and it was a mess. So I appreciated the fact that we had thought through the wind aspect, and the mobility aspect was good too. Props to the Campbells for creating some carts that could make everything relatively easy to move, even if it was heavy.
Yeah, and the Stivers painted.
Yeah, Stivers painted.
The props, and we had a really great group of prop parents. These also had handles in them, and again, they had to serve a lot of purposes. You could see over here the guard is doing a equipment change in most ensembles. Let's say we had a small ensemble that pretty much always hung out right here. The guard doing an equipment change would be like a back hash, and you would just see equipment out all the time. Or a larger band like us, the equipment change would be on the back sideline or hidden on a yard line, and it always feels forced. As a visual judge, you're watching, and all of a sudden you're just like, why am I watching them leave? I should be watching this, but that's more interesting because there's more motion. And so it's really important to find ways to allow your cast to be able to change. going back to, you know, what Phil's saying, we don't want it to look like we're on a field. We want it to be a stage production. And sometimes a stage production requires some smoke and mirrors and some tricks. So which portion do you want to talk about? So RCC props, they did that show. So that was the paper airplane prop, and this was the design of it. So we had a specific design, because also when you design props, you can't just design them for how you want to use them, but how do you transport them? These would have fallen apart if they were not transported safely. So them coming apart right here and having two pieces and then a pole that separates was a big part of the design process.
Yeah, it was really smart. I was impressed by that.
So it complicated,
Nice.
complicated.
Mhm.
Lots of things to consider.
Absolutely.
And then here's their use, was right there, where they had a little bit of flowing motion, and they had to go up and down, and then they had to switch back to their instruments. And this
Even
is where
setting up those props, I think, was the hardest part of using them, getting them to figure out where the dots were on the field, which we never did, by the way. That was, I think, like the choreo was fine, and getting them to them was not easy, but literally just getting them to put the props in the right spot on the back of the field at the beginning of the show.
And not just that, when you write drill, sometimes you write a moment, but you don't know how complex or simple that moment's going to be. And so you're writing kind of a framework, and then you have to get them out of that back into the regular drill, which is right here. This is the regular drill. So we had to rewrite their entrance and exit from props. All the meanwhile, we wanted that moment to happen. This is the musical moment here in percussion until we transitioned to winds. But we wanted this to happen too. This was the best silk of the show, and we wanted the guard, this moment right here, to be a big part of it. So now visually, this is not that interesting. These are just diagonals. All of the intrigue is now over here on side one. So we wanted people's eyes to come down, follow the performers down into a block, and now we really wanted them to go to here. And this
there's
is where
diagonals. Okay, cool. Yeah.
and this is where we had all of that flowing motion and all this follow the leader, which is not easy to do with guard work. So there's a lot of things that you're trying to create, but like to get the students to succeed at them in the framework of still doing other things.
Yeah.
it was a challenge.
Yeah, I think design wise, that was probably the toughest visual design. At least that was definitely the
toughest moment,
toughest part of the show. That like 30 seconds or whatever.
Cool ideas.
Mm-hmm.
If you had another month with them, would they have been cleaner? Probably.
Yes. Those diagonals would have been cleaner. I'll tell you that much.
And then the flutes had to run out here and unravel that moment, which started to look good
either. Yeah, but actually the flutes, props to them for making that work. You have to have a lot of trust in your friends to like start running. It's like theoretically, if every car at a stoplight when it turned green started at the same time, you'd be good.
Yeah.
And that's the idea is like they all had to trust that the car / person in front of them was going to hit the accelerator at the same rate at the same time. And
from a tight form. And what's happening here musically is we went to virtuosic moments from percussion is to a woodwind feature, and we didn't have shotgun mics yet. So we had to place them pretty close together, and we had to move them pretty close up front. We wanted a layer. And to come out of this, they're really tight. Like their legs are basically touching. So to get out of that moment required, like you said, trust. They had to be able to go from this little blob to, all right, now we're back into forms. And it was not easy. And it was a lot of teaching on the go. Hey, there was some crowd reaction over here, Phil, from your woodwind feature. I saw it.
Dude, to me, that was the beginning of the low reads overbalancing saga.
Yeah.
It's so much just like the physics of the instrument. Tenor sax and bari sax is always going to be
and
always
going to
be
heard.
And
right.
too. a numbers game, and flutes
If we
are always
switched
harder.
half of the tenor saxophone section to clarinet, then maybe
So
there'd be a chance.
the most balanced group I had was 54 woodwinds and 24 brass. So that was like, I always heard a warm sound from the woodwinds, and brass was always there, but not overpowering. And I think that clarinet section was like 24 or 26. So we had as many clarinets as we had brass, and you could actually hear them. It's not a very loud instrument, but when it's the colors there, it's always a warm color. It's always like a desired sound. But I mean, in this section, I think we only had like 10. So it was just so hard to get it to balance. And yeah, it was the beginning of that
flutes.
saga. And twice as many flutes, yeah. So it was definitely a struggle. Yeah. And I think Phil writes differently as a result.
Evan says Evan Pritchard says we had 8 clarinets.
I'm glad his memory is better than mine. I thought about pulling out the drill sheets right now just so I could find it. Yeah. So it's hard to balance, and it definitely creates new challenges.
Yep.
So Phil, what happened next musically? So you got into a little bit of Arrival of the Birds cinematic orchestra, but then the next movement is where we had to find contrast.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like the culmination of our early design meetings, we could, in short summarize the show of Sky Blue as like on the literal side at least, being an assemblage of different things you would see in a sky, or different things you would see in the sky. So if the Doria Arrival of the Birds was, like the lighthearted, like the birds, paper airplanes, hot air balloons, we wanted to create contrast by going darker. So at the end of Arrival of Birds, things kind of like take a turn a little bit and get a little bit more gritty. So we decided we would create like a storm section, or like thunder or lightning and rain, like some of the more dark things that would happen in the sky.
So you could see.
I think, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I think Mr. Cook is like 10 out of 10 on always suggesting the wind ensemble literature we end up using in our field shows.
I do listen to a lot of it.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. It's good. Yeah, I mean, because you threw up a bunch of things actually, like the Johann de Meij stuff.
Yeah. So we ended up with John Mackey, and everyone knows John Mackey. But here are some of the original thoughts that we had. So we ended up going with that. But so Windy City Overture by Johann de Meij, and then The Big Apple by Johann de Meij. Johann de Meij is an incredible arranger and composer. He wrote my freshman year in high school field show was based off of his take of Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings it was like a 5-movement or 4-movements symphony that he wrote, and it captured kind of each kind of different thematic material from not the Lord of the Rings that all of you know, but the
this is before
animated
the movies
series.
ever.
Yeah, my freshman year in high school was in the 90s still. So yeah, none of those movies existed yet. But his writing is really pretty special. Yeah. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
So right off the bat, just that, it doesn't have the same happiness and lightness as the others. The other one, and you could see when we share this stuff, we sometimes put a timestamp of, hey, like this is a really long piece, but listen to that moment. So that was a little bit more uplifting, but there's like a, muted brass. There's a lot of like intensity to it that the other pieces just didn't have. So we threw out a bunch of that stuff. And then right here at the 6-minute mark, this is from another thing altogether.
Yeah, I want to see some of that. I want to say some of that chromatic stuff we ended up using, or that was the inspiration for the chromatic stuff in the pit, just suggesting like wind and kind of. I mean, it's two things. The chromaticism suggests a dark color in general, But also in the context of other things happening, it suggests like winds and turbulence.
So then we had also playing backfield. We had other things to darken up the sound, and then we have this flowing motion, and we wanted it to not be together. But again, band kids always try to do things together because that's what they're normally instructed to do. And so we have now a dark silk being used, and we try to create this swirling effect that was probably achieved better earlier. And then we have this kind of dark, sinister sound, and that was all lightning field by John Mackey, which was not easily performed. John Mackey stuff, his wind ensemble literature is generally speaking a level 3 or a beyond. I think lightning field's like a level 3 or 4 out of 6 being professional and top 5 wind ensembles and college wind ensembles.
Well, I'd say it should extend past 6, but that's the only thing that, like, past 6 they just don't list it.
The schema does not exist.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, like what you just did at Allstate when you were managing
his symphony, right?
Yeah, that's well, it's
or multi-movement work, whatever.
Multi-movement, yeah. So
or Windark, that's what it was. Windark C.
Well, Windark C was the
stupid hard.
And This Cruel Moon is from that. Yeah. So like his stuff can be obscenely hard and difficult, but what he does well is he writes for a lot of low reeds and low double reeds. So his wind ensembles and organ. So his wind ensemble literature will often have, bass clarinet, contra alto clarinet, contra bass clarinet, and then bassoon, and then contra bassoon, which is like a $60,000 instrument to start. And then organ. And then as Mr. G and his friend Sean experienced, a lot of different percussion sounds and a lot of different, not really traditional percussion things, like where, bowed vibes or water chime or chains, or like he does
chains
a lot
on
of
a cymbal.
Chains on a cymbal. Like, so, and Phil, you went to UCLA and was in the wind ensemble. You probably experienced some of the stuff. Did you actually perform any of his stuff?
We did Aurora Awakes.
Beautiful piece.
I don't remember if we did the whole thing or part of it, but we definitely did that. And yeah, that piece was well. He wrote a harder vibe part than I want to say that I played at Blue Devils.
That's
hard
insane.
In some ways. Hard just because it was literally 2 pages of straight 16th notes that you had to use 4 mallets for. I mean, obviously, like the Blue Devil stuff was written first by someone who knows how to write.
So something actually about that you bring it up. So John Mackey specifically is not an instrumentalist of any kind. He grew up around music and he likes music. And he has an ear for it, obviously, but he doesn't play any of the instruments. So that is something absolutely unique to him. When Phil writes, Phil, is a percussionist. He is writing for wind players and other musicians, but his ear is maybe attached to that. Ron Nelson, I don't know what Ron Nelson's original instrument is, but he is someone who wrote ridiculously hard percussion parts. Also, I actually did a piece where he had 2 different marimba parts for wind ensemble. That's not normal. So sometimes when you draw in these arrangers or this source material, sometimes you're attracted to a sound that they create, that sonic, what they lean on. And sometimes what they lean on is informed by what their like hands-on experience is. And John Mackey's percussion stuff is insane. It's really cool though.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. I think this was the hardest piece for me to work with too, just to arrange, because the other pieces were a little bit more, I mean, they definitely breathed more. They had a lot more openness to them. Whereas this Mackey piece in particular is really dense. And so figuring out how to adapt it for the field, because I think if I remember, there's a lot of syncopation and rhythmic stuff that would have been a nightmare to try to clean on the field. And then B, how do you take just the right parts of the piece to fit the 1.5 minutes or whatever window we had to do the piece in. So I definitely spent most of my time on this movement.
Some of that also has to do with as you're writing, there are certain like things that like, well, we need time for this. this moment, and we've already written this and we're attached to it. So sometimes the stuff in the middle, I think in our last meeting, we talked about what we did with Cloudburst, how we couldn't fully develop that moment maybe like we wanted to, and there were structural limitations that we had. So it was definitely a challenge. There was other super cool material. Paul put in this stuff from Winged Migration, which was like very, very unique sounding. So totally like sound palette completely different. Obviously very thematically on point, but it was definitely like stuff we considered but weren't able to like fit it into the overall concept. What's next musically? Because I guess I can go back up to here. This is when we start transitioning to the final movement, right? This is where we go into the concept of sunset, and we bring back all of our Arnolds. And if you could see here, sunset with Oliver, we talked about a pretty short amount of time, and then leaning on Sky Blue, and having these two contrasting tempos to close, just like we did in the previous year's show, the Price of Progress show. We started with another kind of reset tempo-wise, and then we pumped up the tempo to close it out. That is not what we ended up doing. Do you remember how that happened, Phil?
Yeah, I do. Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to this earlier. I think the more we designed together over the years, we got more comfortable making some decisions up front, and then just knowing that as we were writing and working on the show, we could live with it a while, and then we could decide on, what the last piece might be. And I know like for this upcoming 2020 season, we had a lot of our source material planned, and we were ready to like figure out what the closer was going to be, later in the summer. So I think as I was writing the first couple movements of Sky Blue and working with a piece, and then in the back of my mind, I was also listening to Sky Blue by Peter Gabriel and trying to figure out what parts I wanted to use for the closer. And the more I was listening to it, a lot of it just honestly felt really similar. Like there wasn't enough contrast between sections in that piece, like distinct moments from that piece that stand out from each other enough. I didn't feel like there was enough material to make like a fulfilling marching band moment. Now, you could also, on the other hand, use that piece as an inspiration and then just do a lot of like composing and just basically use kind of that sound palette and some of the chord progressions as a structure. And then you see that happen in drum corps a lot, especially for their closers. Like they'll kind of have a piece, but then they compose like a drum corps ending with the, same chord progression that every brass arranger uses at the end of all the shows. But
not you though.
Well, we'll see. Maybe if I'm still doing this when I'm 70 or whatever, like they are, like it'll be like, yeah, I won't even have to think about it. Just write the same ending. But yeah, so I think, and then as I was listening to Remember, I was listening to that, and even though it is repetitive, there's like distinct moments throughout the piece that kind of contrast or different textures that come in. And I was like, this might be actually a cool, like we could use more of it to start the closer than anything, and then we still want a mood shift halfway through. But I felt like I was comfortable using more of our real estate in that Remember universe.
Yeah, I think we just started being more attached also to that style of sound.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like there's so much about that sound that we preferred over and obviously Peter Gabriel stuff is great, but there was something about that sound, that lightness. You talked about it, like uplifting, and the way he writes, that we prefer. So going into this, we wanted color hue change on props. So that's when we started talking about switching the prop sides, the sunset flag. We wanted it to be a very different color. Everything else has been so much blue. And this is the end of the sky blue and going into kind of that next mood. So we ended the storm scene here, lightning fields, and then we needed to get people to props. And this is major prop shifting, requires time and a lot of effort. We put performers here in the middle to try to distract from all the prop moving and really give us kind of a different visual palette. This is all front ensemble synth, I believe.
Yeah, it was piano, and we were experimenting with rubato too. Not strictly at one tempo, but
yes,
letting it breathe a little bit, which I think was cool.
So there's our color change. So we ended up not bringing the props in as far, but now very much a different color palette that's used to kind of tell the story of this final movement. So yeah. And that's where we started involving our we brought time in with battery, and everyone had to like recover to that. So every concept of what the musical phrase was kind of nebulous. And then all of a sudden we're right there. The problem was we had performers 90 yards apart, 80 yards apart. So it made it kind of a challenge until that moment right there is when we had our kind of a unison moment. And then these are supposed to be kind of rays of the sun. We brought the flags through them for that color. And we finish it out with not straight lines that could have been.
Actually, I mean, I'm reasonably my memory did not do how visually appealing some of this stuff was justice. This is some of the stuff actually looks a lot better than I remember it looking.
And this is a little bit before the end of the season, so we had time to still clean.
Yeah.
And this is the season that got cut short. This is actually our last competitive performance because the final week had fires, and we were canceled out of our last two shows. We had we were kind of within that range of possibility of making championships this year. The 2 years previous, we were 3.3 points away. The year after the Price of Progress show, we were not nearly as close. There was a variety of factors that happened. A lot of people left WBA and came to SSBOA, so it was a crowded field, and there was a lot of just different things happening. And then this show definitely had more of a fighting chance after another week of cleaning, and then some pretty significant fires in our area that really impacted everything.
Yeah,
as they tend to.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of like in the Harry Potter series, which I realize is super nerdy of me to bring up, but like
you're in a safe place.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I guess this is banned. There's like the Quidditch like championships or whatever only happen in like one book, 2 books, something like that of the 7. Because something always happens at the end of the year, and I feel like that's like our experience with with totally. The marching band
everything
season.
So then we went to the only prop that had yellow very intentionally, which was the sun, and this is the sunset. We wanted to be rays of sun. We wanted to gesture towards it, and that's when we brought back this outro was taught in a day, I think on a Thursday night rehearsal right before this show. It was, I think, more rubato playing in the pit on synth, and a visual moment that didn't get a chance to be fully realized, but like we wanted to bring back those paper airplanes and end it again after this.
The other thing, bringing back the paper airplanes, and then this was also bringing back Doria, which is the material that we used for those props as well. It's a reprise of the percussion feature.
Cool. I mean, anything else you want to touch on before we play the show?
I guess just a couple things. Like I definitely while you're talking about the closer, I was kind of playing it through the audio in my mind. And there's some, like, if you're familiar with the Sky Blue piece, there's definitely snippets of the melody strewn throughout the second half of the closer. and maybe we can point a couple of them out. And then I actually really like the show musically. I mean, I liked everything about the show really, but what I liked so much about the music packages is how much it does feel like a complete through line comprehensive thought, because we're ending with material that we introduced earlier in the show. Going into the hit and the closer is reprising some of the choral build samples that we used in the opener. And there's just a lot of things that tie it together and suggest like a bigger universe for the show, like I was saying earlier. So I was happy with the show.
Yeah. Hey, so I'm gonna drop the link to the YouTube video in the chat. So folks, if you'd prefer to watch it externally, I guess from our live stream, you can. The quality should probably be a little bit better. I put the heart video in the description, but I guess if you go onto the channel that was posted on, you can find the one that we're about to watch also. Yeah,
it's all the same one. This one, sound wise, is a lot better. It's definitely different because the camera's bouncing around the pit, so you're not always hearing everything truly as it was meant to be heard further out. Visually, you can't see all the moments, but it's a little bit of a cool vantage point. Do you want to drop this one in too?
Yeah, I'll do it while we're streaming it. I'll find it.
Cool. All right, here goes.
5, 6.
Yeah.
Sweet.
It's actually kind of a cool vantage point of that show.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever seen that video until right now.
I haven't either.
Good stuff. That closer is cool. It did incorporate like 3 different ideas, and I forgot how many different textures were in the lightning fields. Some cool stuff.
Yeah.
Being recorded by the sub definitely changed the low end. That and all, subs and that and having the drill writer being someone who had complained constantly about not hearing low end and just constantly staging low end at the front of the fields.
Right.
That changed things a bit.
Tuba in the front row and that last hit.
I wanted it to sound good finally. I mean, it's funny. I was just watching Faust because we were talking about Pat Seidling, Phantom Regiment.
That's a good one.
I noticed how often, and I love that show. I love their sound that year. It's so common to hear their 14 contras in the front. Every impact, it was contras, horns, drums, like every single one. And it was like one of the first years I remember on like being able to hear that show, being able to hear anywhere I was watching. I could hear contras. I could hear low end. I could hear depth of sound. Like trumpets are always going to be heard. How do you get the low end to be heard? So like I definitely think I was influenced a lot. I've been influenced a lot by more Phantom Regiment than I ever realized. That staging stuff was like, I remember thinking it was like revolutionary. To like, I mean, normally contras are just over there. Stage them over by bass drums. It'll work itself out. But it doesn't. It doesn't. You never always hear the low end. Cool. It's a good show. It's fun. Is that it? It's a wrap.
It's under an hour and a half. It's not too bad.
Nailed it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
See you later.